Number 1. Audrey Anna Jackson. December 2005, Lakewood, Washington. 17-year-old Audriana Jackson was living the kind of quiet, unremarkable life that doesn't make headlines. She was a student, known to friends and family as a girl with a kind heart and a shy smile. She wasn't the type to vanish without a word, but that's exactly what happened. One day she was there, living her routine, and the next she was gone. No dramatic goodbye, no warning signs, just an empty space where a teenager used to be. Her family filed a missing persons report, hoping for answers, clinging to the possibility she'd come home. But as winter turned to spring, hope began to fade. Then in April 2006, a discovery in a wooded area changed everything. Skeletal remains were found, and after identification, the worst was confirmed. Audriana Jackson was dead. She'd been missing for months, and now her family faced a new nightmare. Because while they finally knew where she was, they still had no idea what happened to her or who was responsible. The investigation hit roadblock after roadblock. There were no clear leads, no obvious suspects, no confession waiting in the wings. The cause of death couldn't be definitively determined due to the condition of the remains, and without that critical piece of information, building a case became nearly impossible. Detectives worked the angles they had, interviewed people who knew her, retraced her last known movements, but nothing solid emerged. Audriana's case went cold. Years passed, and her name became another entry in the long list of unsolved cases that haunt law enforcement. Her family has never stopped searching for answers, never stopped asking who took their daughter from them and why. They've held vigils, reached out to media, done everything they could to keep her story alive, hoping someone out there knows something they haven't shared. But as of now, Audriana Jackson's death remains a mystery. No arrests have been made, no charges filed, no justice served. The person responsible, if they're still out there, has lived with that secret for nearly 2 decades, and somewhere in Washington, a family still waits for the phone call that might finally bring them peace. Number 2. The Prom Night Murders, May 22, 2005, Huntington, West Virginia. 4 teenagers were celebrating what should have been one of the best nights of their young lives. Prom had just ended, and they were riding high on the kind of joy that only comes once. But that night ended in a way no one could have imagined. All 4 were shot dead in what became known as the Prom Night Murders, a case that has haunted the community for nearly 20 years. The victims were young, full of potential, dressed in their best clothes, heading into a future that was stolen from them in an instant. The news shook Huntington to its core. How could something so horrific happen to kids just celebrating a milestone? The investigation launched immediately, with police canvassing the area, interviewing witnesses, and trying to piece together the final hours of these teenagers' lives. But despite the urgency and the resources poured into the case, leads dried up quickly. No clear motive emerged, no suspect was identified, and as time went on, the trail went cold. Theories circulated in the community. Was it a random act of violence? A targeted attack? Did the killer know the victims, or was this a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Law enforcement explored every angle, but nothing stuck. The lack of physical evidence and reliable eyewitness testimony made building a case nearly impossible. Years turned into decades, and the prom night murders remained unsolved. Families were left without closure, forced to live with the unbearable weight of unanswered questions. Who took their children from them? Why? And will that person ever be held accountable? The case remains open, and detectives still encourage anyone with information to come forward. But as of today, no one has been charged. 4 teenagers went to prom and never came home. And somewhere out there, The person responsible has walked free for nearly 20 years. The passage of time hasn't erased the pain or the mystery, and Huntington still remembers the night that changed everything. Number 3, Maggie Long. December 1st, 2017, Bailey, Colorado. Maggie Long was 17 years old, a high school senior with her whole future ahead of her. She was home alone that day, preparing for a concert she was supposed to attend that evening with her school's band. But Maggie never made it to that concert. When family members arrived home later that night, they found the house engulfed in flames. Firefighters rushed to the scene, battling the blaze, and once it was under control, they made a devastating discovery inside. Maggie Long was dead. This wasn't just a tragic fire. Investigators quickly determined it was arson, and items had been stolen from the home. This was a crime scene, and Maggie had been murdered. The brutality of it shocked the small mountain community. Who would target a teenage girl in her own home? And why? Detectives dove into the case, interviewing friends, family, and anyone who might have had contact with Maggie in the days leading up to her death. They reviewed security footage, analyzed forensic evidence, and tried to build a timeline of what happened in those final hours. Witnesses reported seeing suspicious individuals near the property around the time of the fire, and police released descriptions hoping someone would recognize them. But despite the tips that came in, despite the media coverage, and the community's desperate desire for answers, the case stalled. No arrests were made. Maggie's family was left in a state of anguish, unable to understand who would do this or what Maggie could have possibly done to deserve such a fate. They held vigils, spoke to the press, and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. The community rallied around them, but the lack of progress was maddening. Years have passed since that December night, and Maggie Long's murder remains unsolved. Her family continues to fight for justice, working with investigators and keeping her story in the public eye. They've never given up hope that someone will be held accountable. But as of now, the person who killed Maggie, set her home on fire, and stole from her family has never been caught. The case is still open, and detectives believe someone out there knows something that could break it wide open. Until then, Maggie's family waits, and a community still grieves the loss of a bright young woman whose life was stolen far too soon. Number 4, Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr. February 19, 2005, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone Jr. were out for a night they'd never finish. The two had been seeing each other, enjoying a relationship that seemed to be going well. That evening, they met up at a bar in the city, spending time together, having drinks, just a normal night out. But when they left that bar, they vanished. Completely. Danielle and Richard got into his truck, a dark-colored Dodge Dakota, and drove off into the night. They were never seen again. Neither was the truck. It's as if they disappeared into thin air, leaving behind families desperate for answers and investigators baffled by the complete lack of evidence. The case immediately drew attention. Two adults don't just vanish without a trace, especially in a city like Philadelphia. Police launched an extensive search, checking traffic cameras, interviewing bar patrons, retracing their steps, and following up on every tip that came in. They searched waterways, abandoned buildings, and rural areas outside the city. But nothing turned up. No sign of Danielle, Richard, or the truck. The investigation explored every possible angle. Was it foul play? Did they run into trouble on the road? Were they targeted? Or was this random? Theories ranged from robbery gone wrong to something more personal. Both had connections and lives that investigators combed through, looking for anything that might explain their disappearance. But despite the effort, despite the resources, the case went cold. Families were left in limbo, unable to grieve properly because there were no bodies, no closure, no definitive answers. Danielle's son lost his mother. Richard's family lost a son, and the community was left with a mystery that defied explanation. Over the years, the case has been revisited multiple times. New leads have been pursued, new theories tested, but nothing has brought Danielle and Richard home. The FBI has been involved, offering rewards for information, but the silence has been deafening. Nearly 20 years later, the disappearance of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petroni Jr. remains one of the most perplexing unsolved cases in the region. Two people, gone without a trace, and somewhere out there, someone knows what happened. Until that person speaks, the mystery endures, and two families continue to search for the truth. Number 5. Stephen Coker, December 13th, 2009, Henderson, Nevada. Stephen Coker was a 30-year-old man trying to make his way in a tough economy. He'd been struggling to find steady work, living in Utah, doing odd jobs to get by. He wasn't the type to disappear without warning, but that's exactly what happened. On that December morning, Stephen drove his car into a quiet residential neighborhood in Henderson, parked in a cul-de-sac, and walked away. A home security camera captured him, leaving his vehicle, dressed casually, carrying nothing that suggested he was going far. And then he was gone. His car sat in that cul-de-sac for days before anyone noticed. When it was finally checked, there were no signs of a struggle, no indication of where Stephen had gone or why he'd left his car there. His phone records showed he'd been in contact with people in the days leading up to his disappearance, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He hadn't mentioned any plans to leave, hadn't hinted at any danger or distress. He just walked away and never came back. The investigation tried to piece together Stephen's final days. He'd been working various jobs, including some work in the Las Vegas area, which explained why he was in Nevada. But why Henderson? Why that specific neighborhood? Detectives interviewed residents, checked surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses, and traced his movements as best they could. But the trail went cold almost immediately. There were no witnesses who saw him after he left his car, no transactions on his bank accounts, no activity on his phone. Stephen Coker had simply vanished. Theories have been proposed over the years. Some believe he met with foul play, possibly connected to someone he knew or encountered. Others think he may have walked away intentionally, starting a new life somewhere else, though those closest to him find that hard to believe. There's also the possibility of an accident, that he wandered off and met with some misfortune in the desert or remote areas nearby. But without evidence, it's all speculation. Stephen's family has never stopped searching. They've kept his case in the media, worked with investigators, and held out hope that someday they'll know what happened. But as of now, Stephen Coker's disappearance remains unsolved. His car was found, but he wasn't. And nearly 15 years later, his family still has no answers. Somewhere out there, the truth of what happened on that December day exists, but it's a truth that is yet to be uncovered. Number 6. Elaine Park, January 28, 2017, Calabasas, California. Elaine Park was 20 years old, a college student with aspirations and a close relationship with her family. She'd spent the night at a friend's house, and the next morning, her car was found abandoned in a parking structure near Malibu Canyon. But Elaine wasn't in it. She was gone, and she hasn't been seen since. The circumstances of her disappearance immediately raised red flags. Her car was left unlocked, her belongings inside, and there was no sign of where she'd gone or why she'd leave her vehicle behind. Her family reported her missing, and investigators began piecing together her last known movements. She'd been with a friend the night before, and that friend was one of the last people to see her. But the details of that night have been the subject of intense scrutiny and conflicting accounts. The investigation explored every lead. Detectives interviewed friends, family, and anyone who had contact with Elaine in the days before she vanished. They searched the rugged terrain around where her car was found, combing through Malibu Canyon and surrounding areas, but no trace of Elaine turned up. Her phone records were analyzed, her social media reviewed, but nothing provided a clear answer. The case drew media attention, especially after being featured in cold case documentary series, bringing renewed focus to Elaine's story. Her mother became a tireless advocate, pushing for answers and keeping Elaine's name in the public eye. She's spoken about the agony of not knowing, of living in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Is Elaine still alive? Did she meet with foul play? Was her disappearance connected to someone she knew, or was it something else entirely? Theories have circulated, but without concrete evidence, the case remains open and unsolved. The passage of time hasn't made it easier for Elaine's family. If anything, the questions have only grown heavier. Where is she? What happened that morning after she left her friend's house? And will anyone ever be held accountable? As of now, Elaine Park's disappearance is still a mystery, and her family continues to search for the truth, hoping that one day they'll finally get the answers they deserve. Number 7, Andrew Sadek. May 1st, 2014, Wahpeton, North Dakota. Andrew Sadek was a 20-year-old college student living a relatively normal life, or so it seemed. But behind the scenes, Andrew had been caught up in something that would ultimately lead to his disappearance and death. He'd been arrested for a minor drug offense, and to avoid serious charges, he agreed to work as a confidential informant for local law enforcement. It was a decision that may have cost him his life. Andrew went missing in early May, and his body was found weeks later in the Red River, weighted down with a backpack full of rocks. He'd been shot in the head. The circumstances surrounding his death raised immediate questions. Was Andrew killed because of his role as an informant? Did someone find out he was working with police and retaliate? Or was his death unrelated to his cooperation with law enforcement? The investigation into Andrew's death has been deeply controversial. His family believes he was put in a dangerous position without adequate protection or oversight, and they've fought for accountability ever since. They argue that Andrew was a young man who made a mistake and was then used by the system in a way that left him vulnerable. Law enforcement has maintained that they followed proper procedures, but the lack of resolution in the case has only fueled the family's frustration. Despite the investigation, no one has been charged in Andrew's death. The case remains open, but years have passed without significant progress. His family has kept his story alive, speaking to media and participating in documentaries that explore the dangers faced by confidential informants. They want justice for Andrew, and they want systemic changes to prevent other families from experiencing the same tragedy. Andrew Sadek's death is a haunting reminder of the risks involved in undercover work, especially for young, inexperienced individuals. His family's fight for answers continues, but as of now, the person responsible for his death has never been identified or held accountable. Andrew's story is unresolved, and the questions surrounding his final days remain unanswered. Number 8, Rico Harris. October 10th, 2014, Yolo County, California. Rico Harris was a former basketball prodigy, a man who once had a promising future in the sport but had struggled with personal demons in the years that followed. At 6 feet 9 inches tall, Rico was hard to miss, and yet he disappeared without a trace while traveling from his home in Southern California to his girlfriend's place in Washington State. His last known location was near Sacramento, where his car was found abandoned on the side of a highway, but Rico was nowhere to be found. The discovery of his car launched an extensive search. Authorities combed the area, using search dogs, helicopters, and ground teams to scour the rugged terrain. Rico's belongings were in the car, including his wallet and phone, which made it clear he hadn't planned to disappear. So what happened? Did he wander off and get lost? Was he disoriented, possibly struggling with mental health issues? Or did something more sinister occur? The investigation explored all possibilities. Rico's family and girlfriend cooperated fully, providing information about his state of mind and his plans. He'd been open about his struggles with addiction and mental health, but those close to him didn't believe he'd intentionally vanish. They described him as a man trying to turn his life around, focused on getting to Washington to be with his girlfriend. But somewhere along that journey, something went wrong. Despite the search efforts and the media attention, no trace of Rico has ever been found. His case has been featured in multiple cold case documentaries, bringing renewed attention to his story. His family has never given up hope, continuing to search and advocate for answers. They've held out the possibility that he's still out there somewhere, perhaps living under a different identity or suffering from amnesia. But as the years have passed, that hope has been tempered by the grim reality that Rico may have met with tragedy. The mystery of Rico Harris's disappearance remains unsolved. His family is left with questions that may never be answered, and a community that once celebrated his talent now mourns the loss of a man who simply vanished. Somewhere out there, the truth of what happened to Rico exists, but it's a truth that continues to elude everyone searching for it. Number 9. Michael Fisery. June 21st, 2005, Yosemite National Park, California. Michael Fisery was an experienced outdoorsman, someone who knew his way around a trail. He'd come to Yosemite to do what he loved, to hike and explore one of the most beautiful places in the country. But on that June day, Michael set out on a hike and never came back. He was reported missing when he failed to return, and park rangers immediately launched a search. Yosemite is vast, with rugged terrain and countless places where someone could get lost or injured. The search for Michael was extensive, involving helicopters, search dogs, and teams of rangers combing the area where he was last seen. But despite the effort, no sign of Michael was found. No backpack, no clothing, no indication of where he'd gone or what had happened. The investigation considered every possibility. Did Michael get lost and succumb to the elements? Did he fall from a cliff or suffer some other accident that left him in a location searchers couldn't access? Or was there something more to his disappearance? Park officials reviewed his plans, talked to anyone who might have seen him, and analyzed the terrain he would have covered. But nothing provided answers. Michael's disappearance became one of many unsolved cases in national parks, places where the vastness of nature can swallow someone whole. His family was left with the unbearable uncertainty of not knowing. They couldn't grieve properly because there was no body, no closure, no definitive end to the story. They've kept his case open, hoping that someday a hiker will stumble upon something that leads to answers. But as of now, Michael Fisery remains missing. The case is still open, and park rangers continue to keep it on their radar. But nearly 20 years have passed, and the chances of finding him diminish with each passing year. Yosemite, for all its beauty, holds secrets, and Michael Fisery's fate is one of them. His family waits, and the mystery endures. Number 10. Armand B. Johnson, April 13th, 2005. Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, Hawaii. Armand B. Johnson was found shot in one of the most remote and beautiful places in the country. He was discovered in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, a place people visit to witness the raw power of nature, not to become a victim of violence. But that's exactly what happened. Armand's body was found with gunshot wounds, and the circumstances surrounding his death immediately raised questions. Who was he? Why was he there? And who would shoot him in a national park? The investigation launched quickly, with park rangers and federal authorities taking the lead. National parks fall under federal jurisdiction, and crimes committed there are taken seriously. But despite the resources and the urgency, the case hit a wall. There were no witnesses, no clear motive, and no obvious suspect. Armin's background was examined, his movements in the days leading up to his death traced, but nothing provided a clear explanation. Was this a random act of violence? Did Armin know his killer? Was there some dispute or conflict that led to his death? Investigators explored every angle, but the answers remained elusive. The remoteness of the location made the investigation even more challenging. Hawaii Volcanoes National Park is vast, and the area where Armin was found was isolated. There were few people around, limited surveillance, and no easy way to track who might have been in the area at the time. The case went cold, and years have passed without resolution. Armin's family was left with the devastating reality that they may never know who killed him or why. The lack of closure is a weight they've carried for nearly 20 years, and the passage of time hasn't made it any easier. They've hoped for a break in the case, for someone to come forward with information, but so far, that hasn't happened. Armin B. Johnson's death remains unsolved, a mystery that haunts both his family and the investigators who worked the case. The person responsible has never been identified, never been charged, never been held accountable. And somewhere in the beauty of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, a dark secret remains buried, waiting for the truth to finally come to light.